Okay, real life. Okay, hi everybody. Um, I'm just checking if everything works. Today, we are about to talk with Sirisha. Sirisha has an amazing experience with Scrum Mastering and business analysis in large companies. So she is really experienced manager in large companies in United States, and we are about to talk about three things today. First one is what does it mean to stay competitive and still grow your skills and grow your abilities as a Scrum manager, especially now when everything's changed because of COVID, but not only because of COVID, because everything is going fast and everything is changing rapidly and there's a lot of turbulence outside. And Scrum Masters, as we know, they have to engage and input a lot into product development, product management, backlog cleaning. We are going to talk about this. The second thing I would like to talk to Sirisha today, which you will learn, is how to protect backlog from different forces, which I mean, like, there's a lot of stakeholders, product managers, business side, IT side, everybody's trying to get their poke into the business and try to influence backlog. And one of the job of people like her is to keep that backlog going and prioritizing. And the third thing, which is going to be our topic, is artificial intelligence. Does it influence Scrum Mastering? Maybe not, maybe it's too early, maybe it's in the future, who knows? So that's her. And Sirisha, if you can tell us about your experience, where you come from, what's your story, and we can jump to the conversation afterwards.
Great. Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me here. Glad to be speaking to you about this. Before I was a Scrum Master, I worked in the product management space. So I did have the experience of reaching out to clients and finding out what their requirements are and seeing how the teams that we would work with would deliver on those requirements. And
Okay.
so after a little bit of that experience, I moved into working at the team level as a Scrum Master with the team members themselves, such as the developers and product owner.
Uh-huh.
And my experience with that, to my personality, has been better as a Scrum Master. I like working with the same folks on a daily basis, understanding their personalities, figuring out what their skill set is, and seeing how we can use those skill sets best to deliver on the commitments that we have for that specific iteration or for a time period. So
Yeah, speaking about commitments, what do you mean by that? Because that's something really interests me, and I believe our audience would like to hear about that too. Somebody's coming with something, and there's a commitment. So there's a difference between you declare to do something and then you commit. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how you operate in a commitment space? Today we can do so many stuff. We can implement so many features, so many things. Can you tell us a little bit what's your experience with that? Maybe give us a little bit of specific so people can learn how to be a great Scrum Master.
yeah, sure. So when it comes to commitment, there's two perspectives, right? There's a leadership team and a stakeholder team that your teams are sort of reporting to. They're talking to their deliveries to. And then there is the commitment from a team perspective. As a Scrum Master, I would say my job is to best protect my team from committing to anything that would be beyond what their capacity can take. Right. So it's very possible when a team is in the middle of an iteration and then a stakeholder or a manager with a very aggressive timeline on something that's come up urgently will come up and try to change the scope of work that your team has already committed to for that iteration. And so as a Scrum Master, you have to do the best you can to protect your team against that. And so in terms of commitment, to me, that means that you ask the team based on the availability of them, of their capacity for that iteration, what can they actually commit to, not what the manager is expecting them to commit to.
So
Because
so here's,
yeah.
so I'm sorry interrupting you, but I will go a
No,
little
no,
bit
go
deeper.
ahead.
So here's the story. Like there is this vice president, and his people are stepping into the to the meeting, and they are just saying, "Hey, we saw that, for instance, Uber or Google is building something. Let's do the same because we have resources, capacity, and more knowledge about that." What's then? How do you say these guys know, or how you know approach that situation? What's your secrets, or what's your story?
Yeah, I think you have to have a very diplomatic approach. Leaders can be exactly that, right? There are very effective leaders, and then there are leaders that want to perform and they care about how they look,
Right.
to their leadership team. So it's up to you to strike that balance and sort of give them the reality check of, okay, listen, I know you have great things in mind that you want them to accomplish, but these are people. There is such a thing as team morale, and so you have to make sure that your developers and your product owner are not overwhelmed with the work that's coming their way. And so there has to be a alignment and an agreement ahead of what's being committed to in terms of what the expectations are, what are we committing to, and if you're going to have to ask us to change that scope in the middle, we need to clearly communicate what that is going to, what the pros and cons of that change of scope would be. So if you're asking me in the middle of an iteration to say, hey, I need this work urgently, and I need you to do that in addition to what you've already committed, it's your job as a Scrum Master to say, okay, we can take this on, but here's what we are going to have to pivot from. Here's what we're not going to be able to deliver because the team capacity hasn't changed.
Okay.
And so there's only so much that we could do.
Okay. You speak about iterations. And we know that's how we introduce you to people here, that you have experience with large companies. Large companies, I mean, besides there is a lot of people working for that institutions, there is also a big organizational structure. People are working all over the country. United States of America, it's a huge country, 320 million people land. Those companies you have experience with, they are spread out all over the countries, all the states. Airlines industry you have experience with, operating everywhere. Considering that, what's your iteration approach? What would be your advice to Scrum Masters and people that are close to product and backlog building? How that iterations are important, how to run them properly, and especially in such a huge environment, because startups from that point of view, they have an easier job to be done because the structures are different. There is not so much responsibility. You work for companies that are, responsibly, that your companies are stock exchange listed, or they public companies you have experience with. So can you tell us a little bit about iterations, getting to customers, and how you use that for the better Scrum mastering journey?
Yeah, so I think it's a good point that you brought up about startups, right? So there are different kinds of organizations that somebody could work in. So a Scrum Master's roles aren't, set in stone where you perform the same way in every single organization. So if you are in a startup organization, the chances are that they're not as organized and as mature as a bigger company. And so the problem there comes where you might not necessarily have a Scrum Master that's only being a Scrum Master. You might have to wear multiple hats. You're being a Scrum Master, you're being a product owner, you're being a product manager.
Right.
Whereas if you take a larger organization, then you might have those roles set in stone. You might have an actual Scrum Master, you might have a product owner, and you might have team members. So the best way to approach that is to really understand what are the different roles that are part of your delivery team, right? And then getting a clear understanding of what the responsibilities of those roles are, and seeing if you need to wear those multiple hats, or if you're being a Scrum Master, your main job is to facilitate and to sort of be an orchestrator. right?
Right.
So when it coming to the point of iterations and planning, it really depends on how your company is organized.
Okay.
For example, I've had experiences where I worked with independently agile teams, and then I've had experiences where teams are working as a scaled agile
Okay.
um, perspective. And so with the scaled agile, you're a little bit more organized. You're looking ahead, you're planning ahead, and you're making those plans along with the other teams. So every team, let's say there's 10 teams that are all planning together for the next 10 weeks as to what they're able to deliver and what their goals are. And each one of those teams will have a Scrum Master, and they can all interact and sort of have discussions on, okay, here's what's coming up for my team, here's what we can deliver, and if you have any dependencies on my team, you can tell me now so that we can plan for those dependencies and we can work with your team. But when it comes to startups, it's not as organized. So you have the threat of being disrupted in the middle of an iteration. And the best thing you could do as a Scrum Master then is use your communication skills, talk to people and make it clear of what was expected in the beginning, what the scope changes, and what the impact of that would be.
Okay. So you mentioned like wearing different hats, and it seems to, it looks to me that a lot of the things you have to do have also a lot of in common with soft skills. Like you need to work on your things and deliver and keep the scope of work working, but on the other side, you have to be kind of a negotiator. In the book of product management roadmap, I read something like it's called shuttle diplomacy, that product managers and product owners, they have to constantly shuttle between different stakeholders and to keep the scope of work, I would say it's kind of like permanent, or not change the scope of work too much, or definitely what you said, not to disrupt the iterations. You have to constantly know what's going on around. So what I'm going to ask you now is how to grow as Scrum Master in terms of getting skills, mastering your skills. Because on one side you need to be very product person, on the other side you need to act almost as the vice president or executive of the product, meaning you have to talk to people, communicate with people. On the third side, you need to also get in touch with new technologies, with new ways of working. Not everything is now so coined like it used to be before. Now the methodologies can kind of like work each other and stuff like that. So my question is, and I would love our audience to learn, how as a Scrum Master, you considering a lot of complexity in your work, how you can grow, how you can stay competitive, how you can provide more and more value to your team, your company.
Yeah, so I think in my experience, I have found it that the best learning came from actually doing the job.
Okay.
You can definitely go and get certified, right? You can start with the basics, start with your basic certification, a certified Scrum Master. Or if it's at a scaled agile level, go do your certified scaled Scrum Master. You'll learn the theory of it. There's a lot of ceremonies and things like that that you have to facilitate for the teams.
Mm-hmm.
So those type of theoretical learning you can do in those certifications. And when you have a framework, the best learning can come from actually doing the job. Before I took on my job as a Scrum Master, I honestly did not have much experience as a project manager or anything like that. But just while you're at the job, the best thing that you could do is really observe your team. Initially, it's going to take some time to grow for your team and for yourself as a Scrum Master. So to learn the ins and outs of how your team dynamics are, what skill sets each person has, and how you can best utilize the individuals for their skill set. So I would say my best learning was on the job. And also another way to maybe staying competitive is there's always communities of practices that you can attend and participate in. If you're in a company where that doesn't all, it's that type of a practice is not already established, then you can create one yourself, right? All you're trying to do is gather at a place with other Scrum Masters and seeing how they're tackling some of the challenges that they're seeing. Maybe coming up with, you might see a new trend that you can adopt for your own team. There's also a lot of tools online. I know for our retrospectives, I had gone online to see what kind of tools we could use to make sure that we're recording our team's performance and keeping up their team morale by keeping their comments and their feedback anonymous, creating a safe environment for them. And so, and I really do feel like as a Scrum Master, your main responsibility is creating a safe environment for your team to perform in. And so, do your research on tools and see what could best work for you. And I also really do believe in trying and failing, or trying and maybe it'll work. So for me, that's the best way of staying competitive, is constantly looking for different tools and newer tools that you can use.
So it looks like to me like a first thing that could be a takeaway is never stop researching. What I mean researching is being curious and learning all the time whenever you're interacting with other product owners inside your company or outside. And then you might have a question like, oh, how we can improve this and that. So quickly go and research or ask people. So one thing that our audience could learn is like never stop researching. So never kind of accept the status quo, meaning that if you work with one tool, you still might check another one, right? That's what you want to say.
And status quo could be very, that's something that you would be stuck with if you're not doing that, right? The beauty about being a Scrum Master is not only are you dealing with different projects coming your team's way, you're also dealing with different personalities, right? The stark difference, I would say, between being a project manager and being a Scrum Master is, as a project manager, you're managing your deliverables, you're looking at the status of your deliverables. As a Scrum Master, not only are you looking at the status of your deliverables, you're also looking at the status of your team members, making sure that your team morale is up. And because you can have multiple different team members with different personalities, this is always a dynamic role. You're going to have to change according to what you're getting on your plate that day or that iteration.
Sure. So
you have to keep up with it.
Yeah. So but from my experience, when you learn kind of on the fly, like you learn, you hear something, you see something, you learn, you have to be constantly kind of plotting the learning process into your work, right? So do you run that research constantly? Do you read constantly? Do you talk to people constantly? For instance, you have a problem with something, so you quickly jump on your company chat or whatever and start asking questions. That's how you run your research, because I guess it's kind of ongoing experience, right?
Yeah, so research could be related to tools that you're using within your teams, but the only other way I can think of is, the communities of practice. So you would get together with other Scrum Masters, maybe on a monthly basis, to see what sort of challenges they've had in the past and what solutions they found for that you can adopt for your team. Or, bringing up your challenge that's maybe specific to your team, and then trying to see what others that are maybe more senior to you can provide to you as a solution or a suggestion that you can try out for your team.
Okay. Does something change in your work when the COVID hits? Like anything particular that you can share, maybe lessons learned that actually improve your work, or something good that happened? We know that many companies, they explore the conferences, numbers dropped because people became more effective. People stopped wasting time on going to office, especially those that were working remotely anyway. So they only move to office and they start talking to people over Zoom or whatever. So that's something particular change now. And did it change, or have it changed already?
Yeah, actually. So anything that your team has to start doing new is a change, right? That you have to sort of see how it's impacting your deliverables. And so the biggest thing that we noticed when COVID happened is, yes, it did cut down our commuting experience, but when you're in the office, you have that face-to-face communication. If you need something, you just go to someone's desk, ask them a question, get back to your desk, and you're done within 2 minutes. The biggest challenge initially was having that constant communication. And when you're doing that virtually, that becomes a meeting. And when you set up a meeting, it's generally not less than 30 minutes, right? Or 15 minutes. But that's still some time in your schedule that you have to set aside,
Right.
And not be doing your development work or other work that, like, not performing and communicating. So there was a large increase of meetings in the beginning, which was very overwhelming for a lot of our team members, because it's just very mentally exhausting when you're sitting in front of a computer, sitting in meetings and talking to people constantly. And I think it's like people have this innate fear that if you're not constantly at your computer and you're not responding to people when they're saying something to you or pinging you, that, oh, what if they think that I'm not working?
Okay.
So these are the personalities that, this is where people's personalities kind of kick in. And so as a Scrum Master, what I could do is, just observe those changes initially. You cannot take action immediately when something happens. You have to observe it. You have to understand what's happening and see, okay, how can we change the process or improve this process so that the team members not so overwhelmed with so many meetings? Maybe can we meet for 30 minutes every day? I mean, you already have your daily stand-ups, but on top of that, if there are other questions that need to happen, you look for patterns, right? As a Scrum Master, why are people reaching out to each other? Is there a pattern there? Can we make it a repetitive meeting so that whoever's interested in attending those meetings can attend, get some information out of it, and get back to work? And not like 10 or 12 people are in hour-long meetings, just trying to sit there and seeing, do I need to be a part of this or not?
Okay. All right. So thank you for this. And now I have a questions coming. So last question we were talking about before, I would like to ask now is artificial intelligence. Like, the reason I would love you ask you this question is because we can see a lot of articles online. Some of them are futurist, very like a future focus, like we are going to see only robots will be doing this and that. But that's kind of future. I don't want to talk about that. But then we have a lot of different things that are happening now. Like, we know that YouTube is creating content using AI, or our cars having AI, or our iPhones or smartphones, Samsung phones, they all have a piece of AI inside, which, for instance, optimize the battery. So I assume each aspect of our life is somehow touched by artificial intelligence. What about Scrum Mastering? Doesn't happen to there?
So I wouldn't say that I've seen any direct impacts to Scrum Mastering by AI, right? I mean, there are different definitions of what AI means in different jobs, right? So for me, AI in the teams that I'm working on or the projects that we're working on, it's mostly automation of processes. That's the most automated something can get. That's right. That's where the human intervention goes away and a machine takes over, right? So in terms of if you're talking about AI such as Siri or Alexa, I think I don't know about far. I'm not an expert at artificial intelligence, but I would say we're a little ways away from probably having Alexa do my job or maybe Siri do my job. But what I could see happening is maybe artificial intelligence could be it could be like an augmentation to my skill set, right? Okay. And in every job, there are always processes or repetitive processes or redundancies that can be taken away by implementing, like maybe a virtual Scrum Master. I think I saw something like I believe it was Accenture, don't quote me on that, but they're working on a virtual Scrum Master that would be taking over the repetitiveness of a Scrum Master job, such as, maybe setting up meetings, taking the metrics from previous iterations or previous works, and then spitting out the predictability of your team's performance going forward. Those are the things that maybe the artificial intelligence could help a Scrum Master with, so that the human part of the Scrum Master could focus on the more challenging aspect of their job, right? Like analyzing that data and seeing how we can improve, what we can do with that data, and what we can do to improve our predictability.
And I like that answer. And the reason for that is because sometimes when you go online and you start reading about artificial intelligence, there's a lot of articles saying that, hey, artificial intelligence will take over your job. And I read a great book recently written by the Taiwanese guy about China, United States fighting with, who is going to dominate AI world. And this guy is actually saying similar things, that a lot of jobs that require emotions, evangelizing, communicating, as you said, orchestrating, wearing different hats, they will even become more important in the AI era, because artificial intelligence will automate a lot, but to some extent. After that,
Exactly.
you still need people to talk about something which is not 0-1, like it's in the middle, and it's full of emotions, empathy, and things like that. So that's actually a great insight from you, because it looks like in Scrum Mastering, when you need to orchestrate a lot of different tasks, the people are the heart and soil of that. So that means that artificial intelligence will find it hard to get in there. Okay, I'm looking at my screen, Sirisha. I have two questions that I would like to pick up from the other ones to make sure that we still will not take more of your time. One was short and hard, and I take this one first. What was your hardest problem, and how did you solve it? Of course, in your Scrum Mastering field.
So
Sorry for shooting like that.
no, that's fine. No, it's a great question, right? So I would say probably understanding how to create a safe environment for the team, right? That was definitely the biggest challenge for me to get, because as I mentioned, there are multiple different personalities on the team. And where I come in is, once we are at the end of an iteration, we take a look back at the iteration to see what were some of the challenges that we've had, and how that's delayed our productivity as a team. Mm-hmm. And if you don't create a safe environment for your team members, and when you're having meetings such as retrospectives to talk about, hey, tell me what's a challenge that you had that slowed you down. It might be very easy for the team members to think that maybe their competency would be questioned if they spoke up about certain challenges that they've had. So this is where your research about tools come in, right? So you have to see what tools you could use to maybe maintain anonymity. If team members are only comfortable speaking about issues if it's spoken at a general level rather than he or she said. Okay. And so and that was really one of the biggest challenges, but the way to sort of overcome that is, like I said, you try and fail or try and succeed. So you try different methods, you try different ways to get your team members comfortable with each other, maybe have some happy hours, have everybody get comfortable with each other at a non-professional level, where you're meeting outside, you're spending some team time together, getting everybody comfortable so that they're able to speak their minds and not feel attacked or feel vulnerable, sort of, to speak up.
So before I ask you another question from another person, it seems like I don't want to put anybody on the side here, but it seems like Scrum mastering could be a hard job to do for those people who are naturally introvert. What do you think about that?
Um, to be honest, I'm a very big introvert.
Really? Oh my goodness.
Yes, I am a very big introvert. I was, I think I mentioned it, but I was very comfortable to come out and be speaking to you right now. So
Yeah,
this is
thank you
definitely
for.
not my comfort zone. So even if you're an introvert, I feel like every job has an aspect that you might not like about it. So it's up to you how to make the best out of that job. There are things, even though I'm an introvert, as I mentioned before, so I was in product management before, where I had to reach out to different clients or talk to different clients that are not part of my team that maybe I'm talking to for the first time to gather requirements. That's something as an introvert made me very uncomfortable. For me, I'm more comfortable working with people that I have a rapport with. And so, there are different aspects of this job where you can make it as personalized as possible and as comfortable as possible. And I do feel like being a Scrum Master is good for introverts because mostly you're working with your team members that you work with on a daily basis. There's only a few times where you might have to reach out to other team members or,
Okay.
people outside of your team. But that could be done via email. You can find ways to comfortably communicate, in your own way.
Sure. Okay, thank you for this. That was actually surprising because I would never say you are
I'm
introvert type
definitely
of
an
person.
introvert.
Oh, which is a living
I'm a
proof.
very coerced.
It's a living.
I'm definitely a very coerced extrovert. I try to push myself to be an extrovert, but I'm definitely more introverted than I am an extrovert.
All right. That's a living proof that if you guys wondering, hey, I'm introvert, I shouldn't go as a Scrum Master or team leader because I don't know how to speak. So she's a proof it's not true. Okay, I have a question from Akila. How do you introduce a team to operate in the Scrum framework? Which this question has a second part. Sometimes this can be a challenge task as a Scrum Master depending on how the team respond to change. So I see that question as, hey, you bring a Scrum framework or whatever framework is, it injects a lot of agility into the team, but now how to prepare people for that change or how to conduct that change so people will jump in on the same ship and you will start sailing together.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I guess the point of whether you're working in a startup company or you're working in a big organization comes into play, right? If you're in a startup, I feel like any framework that you want to try out, as long as your leadership is aware of the attempts that you're making to make changes to an already functioning team, you can try out different things and see how people react to it. So in a startup, I would say maybe, let the team know that this is something that you're trying to work out for them so that they're more productive as a team, but also have them understand that it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to make them slow at first. But always finding a process that improves productivity is going to take time and make people uncomfortable. But that's you as a Scrum Master coming in as a coach, understanding what that framework requires, preparing your team for the upcoming changes, and then maybe being the cushion for unforeseen challenges or anything that comes up. That's in a small organization. In a big organization, I feel like if you want to introduce your team to something new, there are levels of approvals that you would have to go with, but always bring up the idea of maybe a change or what framework you're going through. You'll have to do your research on exactly how that'll impact the team and be able to present to its benefits. And if that's being worked, if that's been approved, then again, you'll have to work with your team members in managing their expectations, letting them know of the upcoming changes, how uncomfortable it's going to be, and constantly getting feedback so that you're acting on that feedback and making the process a little bit better for them.
Well, following up that question is like, can you give us I don't know, there's no one fit all formula, but speaking about giving feedback, especially when you bring change to the organization, you bring a new framework, stuff like that. Are there any rules you would like to share, or any good practice, or something that people could learn from you about giving feedback? Because in this kind of job, you constantly, or you have a retro meetings, or you have a framework, new stuff changing. There's a lot of feedback flying in the air all the time, including the feedback from customers or other stakeholders. Anything here that you could share with people so their feedback could be more effective, but at the same time glue people together?
Yeah, so I do feel like as a Scrum Master, it's actually very hard to lead because you're not leading your team with authority over them. You're like a servant leader, right? So the team members are not individually reporting to you, but you're reporting on the team.
You're right.
And so I think that camaraderie and working with the team and explicitly stating what your intentions are, what you're trying to do, how you're trying to make the team better, and aligning on a process and agreeing on, okay, this is what we're planning on doing before we start. How do we feel about this? Taking their input and then addressing any concerns, at the forefront. And then while you're implementing it, also constantly asking for feedback and making sure that your team members know that you're looking out for them. It's all about team morale. And if there are concerns that they do bring up, you have to address them intentionally.
Okay.
And that's how you sort of build that trust. You have to, as a Scrum Master, have your team trust you in what you're trying to do. And so they need to know that you're not there to disrupt their work and give them more work. You're just trying to make their lives easier.
Okay, which is kind of interesting attitude, because what you're saying is you need to constantly be aware of what's going on, updating all the time, because you want to kind of be a one step ahead and then prepare people. So it's like a lot of leadership. But that's, I guess, it's like a whole different story for different conversation. One question that and it will be a last one, since we have 11:37 and I know you gotta go. It's kind of like a future focus one. Here it is. Does it help you to use in the near future the AI tools analyzing the team members' emotions or mood? Assuming that there is a chatbots, whatever, are helping you to figure out in the digital world what people are feeling. Do you believe that it happens in the Scrum Mastering and that kind of collaboration, something that will analyze the team morale or stuff like that automatically, so you can make a different decisions or act differently?
Yeah, I think, like I said, from what I've at least seen or not seen, emotionally intelligent tools are, I'm not aware of any, and I honestly don't know how comfortable I feel with that. The human interaction is special in its own way. I don't think you can have surveys and things like that get feedback from people that can maybe help you read what the team morale is like. But I'm not aware of any tools or anything upcoming in the near future, at least in where I work, that would be taking over or something like that.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like, especially now when, I am that kind of person that it's easier it's very helpful for me if I can have at least video conversation with somebody, because I guess I can get more comfortable when I see somebody's body language or face, or we smiling. Especially now when you have a distance contact with people, remote working, that helps. It used to be easier for me to be in a conference room, because at the end you can shake somebody's hands or give five because we did something that build bonds. Now exactly. It's hard. I mean, you still can start acting weirdly in front of your camera, but you will not go through the digital channel to give the real high five. So that might be something.
And I think it's really about striking that balance too, right? Let's say if something like that is coming up that they're asking for your team to implement, if you're strongly feeling against it, and if your team members are feeling strongly against it, as a Scrum Master, you should feel empowered to say no when you feel like the answer is no to something.
Right.
So to me, at least in the near future, unless it's a mandatory implementation in a company, if it were a choice, I would like to keep the human interactions going.
Right. Okay, hey guys, thanks a lot for the questions. Sirisha, thank you very much for your time, especially that I discover you introvert, which I would never ever expect. So having you online,
I promise you I am.
it's a huge highlight of mine. So thank you for agreeing, being with us. Thank you for sharing your insight. I will wrap it up a little bit and send to people who registered over email just a few general thoughts, basically what you shared. Remember, guys, all this is recorded on YouTube and Facebook, so you can always come back, listen, rewind, whatever you want to do. Stay with us, and every 2 weeks I try to invite interesting people like Sirisha, so you can learn from somebody who's actually doing the job. Sirisha, thanks a lot. I wish you good luck, and thank you for being with us. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Arik. It was my pleasure too.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.